Welcome to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We're two physical therapists living the life in Las Vegas. I'm Dr. Erica.
And I'm Dr. Joe. We created this podcast for two reasons. First, to connect the healthcare, wellness, and fitness communities in Las Vegas. And second, to highlight all the amazing people we've met along the way.
Thank you for listening, and remember to take care of yourself.
Today's guest is Maddy. She studied at Viterbo University in Wisconsin, receiving her BS in Nutrition and Dietetics. She serves as the president-elect for the Nevada Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and her nutrition counseling style has an emphasis on intuitive eating. That's a concept that embraces one's ability to honor hunger cues and reject societal dieting rules. As the sole owner of Desert Dietitians, she is enthusiastic about serving Vegas using food to improve the lives of locals.
Thank you, Maddy, for joining us on La Vida Las Vegas podcast.
Thank you.
So we'll get right into it. So why did you choose Las Vegas?
All right. So I was born in Deerfield, Wisconsin, or at least I grew up there. That's all I remember. We moved to a farm when I was about 5 years old, and I went to school in Wisconsin, and it's there that I met my husband. And when I was looking for an internship opportunity, I happened to stumble upon the hospital that I'm currently working at. And it was a great opportunity for me to do my internship and for my husband to start grad school. So we kind of settled in Las Vegas thinking it would be a year or two that we are here. And fast forward 6 years later, and I'm still here.
Excellent. And so what do you like to do, or what do you like about Vegas?
I enjoy the outdoors. So recently, going to Mount Charleston and enjoying some cooler weather because it's pretty hot out. But I even just ventured into the desert pretty close to my house, and it was like 113 degrees. But it's nice to still get outside and to get to the top of a hill and look the other way where there's no houses and remember that, nature's still pretty close to us, even though we can forget about it sometimes when we wake up and go to work, Monday through Friday. So
the mountains might be a little different than in Wisconsin then, huh? Growing up on a farm, you said?
Yeah. So it's interesting. We learned a lot about the nature of Wisconsin going to school there. And I guess the glaciers kind of stopped like right after Wisconsin. So we have like all of the rolling hills and we have caves and, we have a lot of diverse, landscape in Wisconsin, but we definitely don't have the desert. And, that's a totally different experience. It's warm there. It's very green there, but there's some great hiking and, me when I was, in grade school, venturing out into the woods is kind of like what I do out here. Mm-hmm. It's totally different, but it kind of gives me that same sense of kind of getting away and stepping back into the world.
Did you grow up doing agricultural type stuff growing up?
Yeah. So I'll go back to my my childhood then. So we had a hobby farm, as we called it. It wasn't like our income or anything like that, although my dad did grow up on a dairy farm a couple hours north of where I grew up. And his mom and his brother still run that dairy farm, actually. So we do like dairy in Wisconsin. But on this hobby farm, we had horses, turtles, chickens at one point, dogs and cats. And it was really wonderful growing up there. We did a lot of just like our own little organic farming. It was like 32 acres, and I'd say a solid 15 of that was just dirt that we dug up, and the soil there is amazing. And here in Vegas, if you want a plant to live outside, I feel like you have to put so much effort into keeping it alive. Like you have to get the right soil and keep giving it the right nutrients, and it has to constantly get water or it will shrivel up and die in like minutes. But anyways, in Wisconsin, the dirt is just so black and it just is so healthy and nutritious. And, you have the animals there pooping on it and giving it more nutrition and everything. So my first job was selling sweet corn at a farmer's market. So we also grew squash and a lot of tomatoes. I'd say sweet corn and tomatoes. Any type of pepper you can think of. The only fruits we did were raspberries and watermelon, but pumpkins, cucumbers, zucchini, all of those things. And it was a really great first job. It teaches a kid a lot of hard work. Looking back on my summers, you wake up, you weed corn for 4 hours. We had a little field of dreams on our farm. My dad built a little softball field. So, we'd take some batting practice in the middle of the day and then weed corn again. And it's a different type of job because a lot of people are used to like going to work and that hour they get paid. But to be, a child, maybe 11 years old and weeding corn, and you're not going to get anything until the end of the summer when you sell sweet corn. So, but it was a really solid income for a child. Like we could make thousands of dollars in a summer just selling sweet corn, and that was our college money. So I feel like I really got some cool experiences growing up, and I didn't realize it until I moved to the desert. I'm like, goodness, I cannot grow anything here. But how rewarding for a kid to even have that opportunity.
Yeah, I've killed one plant here so far. Somebody gave us a plant as a gift, and I tried to keep it alive for like 2 weeks, and all the YouTube videos in the world didn't save it. So.
I've tried so many times.
It's so he tried to salvage an orchid that had some time in the sun. I don't know how long it was in the sun, but he spent a lot of time trying to salvage that, and that was really awesome to watch him because he was so adamant about like, all right, I'm gonna save this orchid and we're gonna bring it back to life. But then I realized like how tropical an orchid is. Like it needs a lot of water. It doesn't need like a lot of direct sunlight. It's like really indirect sunlight. So like all the things that we did for it was just all wrong.
I think it was basically on life support the whole time I owned it, so it was bad.
Oh,
yeah,
that poor plant.
Yeah, tried my best. Didn't work.
Have you tried gardening out here?
I have tried like various forms of gardening. I have not yet like dug up my backyard and tried to irrigate it and tried to make something that'll last. I'm waiting till we have more of our forever home. Our yard is not very big, as none of the yards are in Vegas. Most recently, I went to a friend's house and they had a beautiful, like, sprawling backyard, which in Vegas, it's hard to find anything, like, close to an acre. So it was beautiful. And I found some mint growing underneath one of her bushes. And she's like, oh my gosh, I think that's growing there because someone had a mojito and they just threw it on the ground. And I was just so impressed by this plant. My mom always personified plants growing up, like, oh, she just wants to sunbathe, or oh, she just wants a drink of water. So that mom in me, I'm like, I'm going to take this mint and I'm going to let it thrive. And I got home, I got, some of my good soil I had to buy at Ace Hardware, gave it some water, a little bit of sunlight, and it did pretty well for a couple of days. And then there was one morning before work where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to give it, 20 minutes of direct sunlight. And I'll put it back inside right before I leave. I forgot it, and by the time I got home, it was like crispy mint leaves. There was no coming back from that.
You can try to brush your teeth with it, maybe.
So what is it that you do?
All right, so I am a registered dietitian here in Vegas. I just got my 5-year pin from my hospital. I've been there my entire career, but I just hit 5 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank
nice.
you. So it's pretty exciting. I keep thinking of myself as like a newbie, and then I'll be in a room with some of my director peers at the hospital, and, it's like, wow, actually, I've been a dietitian for 5 years. So it feels good. But anyways, I'm a registered dietitian. So if you're not familiar with what that is, we are the only like true medical nutrition professional. So in order to become a registered dietitian, you have to get your bachelor's in Nutrition and Dietetics. You have to complete a 9-month internship. And it's all based on different competencies that you have to meet. So some of the internships are 6 months, some of them are a year long. But it's somewhere around 9 months. And there's various competencies that you have to, prove that you are competent in order for you to complete your internship and then take your registration exam to become a registered dietitian. So we have to do 75 hours of continuing education every 5 years. And in 2024, in order to sit for the RD exam, you'll actually have to have your master's. So it is, it's a newer field. People talk about nutrition sciences being, kind of newer. I wish I had some of the history on it with me here because it's really fascinating, how dietitians came about. But we're definitely not just nutritionists. I don't think there's actually a real definition of nutritionist, but we like to just tell people that anyone who has an interest in nutrition is a nutritionist. So for you to go to the gym and hear someone say, let me help you, I'm a nutritionist, that might not mean a lot. Or if you go to GNC, or, if someone at the coffee shop tells you they're a nutritionist, it doesn't mean as much to me as holding that actual credential as a registered dietitian. So dietitians can work in hospitals. We work in community settings like women, infant, and children. I have some really impressive peers that work at the Southern Nevada Health District, some awesome people who work at the Dairy Council, working in the schools. There's so many things. The field is so broad. Even in clinical dietetics alone, it's so broad. I have dietitians who specialize in enteral and parenteral nutrition support, or in the NICU, or with geriatric populations. It's really pretty broad.
Do you have a particular specialty that you have or that you work with?
So I work at a long-term acute care setting. Not a lot of people are familiar with this setting. In order to be at a long-term acute care hospital, you are likely just in the ICU at the hospital. So the patients we have at my hospital are, about half of them are on a vent or tube fed. So to the lay person, I'd say they're on life support. And one of my biggest roles there is just making sure they're getting enough nutrition to get well. A lot of severe wounds, like stage 4 pressure ulcers, which if you've ever seen one of those, it's like a crater in someone's skin. So we're made up of organic materials. So trying to put that back into someone so they can grow tissue can be pretty complex, especially if they have multiple comorbidities that make it hard to feed them if their kidneys or their liver's not working. Feeding someone through their veins, parenteral nutrition can be pretty complex when they have all these other things going on. So it's up to me to look at their labs daily and make sure that whatever we're putting into them is helping them get better.
So take us through if you had a case, and what things are you looking at in terms of, so you mentioned a little bit of labs, but as far as all right, I'm going to adjust this amount because of X, Y, and Z, or just kind of take us through your kind of thought process when you're, going through that.
Okay. So the first thing that comes to my head is just the most recent interaction I had with a patient. I find different disciplines just as valuable as whatever I learned in school. So I bring whatever I learned about nutrition to the plate. And if I have any questions that feel like they're outside of that, I'm calling my peers, because I feel like that's the most valuable thing we can do at the hospital. So today, I had a patient who had a very high sodium level. It was 154, and that's pretty high. High is usually 148, 149, but this patient, I'm like, whoa, they look dehydrated. I looked at what I was giving them. This was just a patient who was fed enterally, but they were getting, 34, 35 milliliters per kilogram of water. And a typical person needs about 30 milliliters per kilogram. So I had this question, why is their sodium so high? I don't think this is me. All of their other labs were pretty stable. I'm like, I don't think this is hydration. I called the pharmacist. I'm like, hey, can we look through this list of medications? Am I missing something? Is there a medication here that's making their sodium high? And after the conversation with the pharmacist, we decided that the Solumedrol the patient was on, which is like a steroid, was making their sodium high. And it wasn't the actual free water flush that I was putting in their tube feeding. So that was a good example of me using my skills as a dietitian and evaluating what I was giving them, and also relying on my peers, because I think that's the most valuable thing we can do in a setting is rely on our different disciplines.
Totally agree. That's really good that you're also humble enough to take the advice of other people and making sure that it's a team approach. It's for us, we really enjoy working with people's coaches or personal trainers, because when you get, once you have two people looking at something, and a lot of times they'll say something you totally didn't even think of, and you're like, oh wow, that's a very good call on that.
Absolutely.
No, it's nice to see that insight, because you are, you're looking at medications, you're looking at their hydration levels, you're working with the nursing staff, docs, and all that stuff. I think that's really cool to be able to use that kind of skill set. But you also have an entirely different practice, right? So you work with, patients who are, really, really sick, but also people who are just, athletes or active people, or just people in general struggling with some nutrition. Can you tell us more about that other part of your practice?
Yeah, thank you for kind of directing me into that. So I've been at this clinical setting for so long and seeing very sick people and, getting some history from them, I just slowly started to worry or care so much about what got these patients to this point. And because, when they're at my hospital, I'm keeping them alive, but what could have been done 10, 20 years ago? So in 2018, I started Desert Dietitians, and this is my private practice where I mostly see, pretty well people with chronic kidney disease or diabetes, or just anyone who just wants to see a dietitian to kind of check up on, whatever they're doing, is this right for me? Because sometimes, there's very well people who just have questions and they just want to know, I saw a naturopathic doctor and they told me this, like, what do you think about that? And talking about someone about their nutrition, everyone's so different and it's so personalized that it's fun to have that opportunity to really break things down, make someone feel comfortable, have a good relationship with food, so that they can have, a happy, active, well life. But I don't like for people to focus so much on the nutrients that they're eating. I want them more to be able to have those nutrients without criticizing themselves or without overthinking it. Does that make sense?
Definitely. So you mentioned the relationship with food, and tell us more about kind of what that means in general.
Thank you. So I think that our relationship with food is just as important as the food that we eat. I mean, the psychology behind food is just so fascinating. There's these concepts that are becoming pretty relevant, pretty big in my community. It's called intuitive eating. I feel like some humans have kind of lost our ability to evaluate our hunger and eat when we're hungry and stop when we're full. We have so many different diet culture things telling us, if you eat that cheeseburger, you're bad. If you eat that donut, you're bad. If you put sugar in your coffee, you are bad. Little things like that. But if we never ruined our relationship with food, we would be able to satiate ourselves. I don't know what I'm trying to say right now. If we had a better relationship with food, we'd be able to listen to all of our internal hunger cues. We have hormones that, tell our body it's time to eat, but sometimes people ignore those and, it's too early to eat, or, I don't feel good about myself, I'm not going to eat. And we start severing all of those relationships that we have with our body, and it makes it so we can't eat nutritious food without having feelings about them that are dictating how we're eating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. You talk so essentially there's so many intertwined emotions that are, involved with the things that you decide to eat, right? Is that what you kind of
Yes.
There's that intertwine of psychology and feelings and emotions that involve around whether or not you're doing a good or bad thing. And I think that plays a huge role. What do you think contributes to that? Why is that a problem?
So I definitely think that, media, social media, that culture of dieting is a big problem because, we have a lot of role models out there, and they look a certain way, and we get the idea that we're supposed to look that way too. Right now, eyebrows and lips are all the rage, and that's what you see, and you think that's how you're supposed to be. Well, for the last few decades, thin women are what we consider attractive. Bulky, fit men are what we consider attractive. So if you have a body type that's kind of anywhere in between that, you get the pressure from society to think that you need to manipulate your body in order to have it look a certain way. And people tell you, you're supposed to eat these foods that are supposed to make your body look that way. So when you keep suppressing, your hunger or, cravings and things like that, we get to a point where we're not eating because we're hungry and we need that food. We might be binging on something that we didn't let ourselves have for so long. So I would much rather enjoy a donut hole or two on occasion and savor it and think of the flavor and think of the mouthfeel than tell myself I'm not allowed to eat donuts. And then the day that someone brings them in, I'm hiding in the bathroom, stuffing them in my mouth. And
that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, it's too bad that we all, put that pressure on ourselves, or when we're out to eat, especially as a dietitian, people think that, I'm supposed to eat perfect. So, you get self-conscious when people are looking at your meals, and if I eat a salad, people are looking at that and like, oh, what a dietitian. But if I eat a burger, it's like, oh, you're a dietitian. So it's really difficult. But, if we all ate when we were hungry and stopped when we were full, things would be very different. But we don't do that. There wouldn't be severely obese people if we did that. There's a lot of animals in the world, and not as many of them are obese as there are humans that are obese. And I really think it's because they don't have some of that psychological influences that tell them to eat. They're probably eating because they're hungry.
So tigers aren't like checking their Instagram.
Yeah.
See what other tigers are eating.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure Tony the tiger is eating his Frosted Flakes.
Oh yeah, I think so. It's interesting too, because does also like how long you're eating have something to do with it? Because I feel like if it's like a quick meal, like now everyone's super busy nowadays, and then people just chow their food down, and then you'll hear people go, "Oh, I ate too much," like after lunchtime, and people will say that. But it's just because they've eaten so fast that they haven't had time to like those hormones to tell them that they're full. I'm sure that's probably pretty common that you would see.
Yeah, I think absolutely. So, there's so many things that are going on when you're eating. Ghrelin is our hunger hormone. It's like, hey, Maddy, it's time to eat. And so they say it takes about 20 minutes for your stomach to kind of send those nerve signals to your brain to tell you to stop. So if you put food in front of yourself and you're like, oh, lunch break, and you scarf it down, you weren't really giving yourself a chance to evaluate your hunger or to even enjoy it. Food is enjoyable, right? And we want to enjoy it, but if you don't give yourself that time to sit down and enjoy it, then you're kind of already defeating yourself. If you, eat slowly, make sure you have water available because, that hunger and that thirst, parts of our brain are right next to each other. So sometimes people are actually thirsty when they think they're hungry. But giving yourself time to, enjoy your meal, chew it, think of the flavor, having a nice environment is important, is really important in being able to sense your satiety. So yes, it's actually there's a lot of research about the environment that people are in and how much they eat. So for example, at a skilled nursing facility, a dietitian's intervention might just be to have this person eat in the dining room. So if, they're depressed or they're sad or they're lonely, getting them up and out of bed and into the dining room, so much research showing that they'll eat so much more. And, having the right type of music on for that person's era, I think it's pretty cool. So if, you grew up listening to the 1950s, whatever, and you're 80-some years old now, putting that music on can actually help people eat more. I guess chocolate or hot chocolate tastes better in an orange mug, like little things like that. There's so much research about our environment and what we're sensing while we're eating.
So when you do that, I guess if you're looking at that, what would be, obviously everyone's different, but what would be an ideal environment for someone to find, or how do you cultivate that?
Mm-hmm. I think that, and I'm not an intuitive eating professional. There's so many amazing people in this field, but I know that one of the most important parts of having a good environment is just making sure you can focus on your food. So if you're eating in front of the TV, or if you're eating while you're driving, or if you're eating in front of the computer, you're already taking your attention away from your meal. So already your brain's not thinking about, what you're feeling in your stomach. You're thinking about work, or you're thinking about driving, or you're thinking about that show. So just having a place that makes you feel good, you don't want to go sit, by the dumpsters if that makes you sad, but having a place where, you can maybe have good conversation with friends, a good lighting so you can see what you're eating and enjoy it. I think that's important.
What about those places that have you eat in the dark?
I've never tried that, but I feel like that's really cool too, because how often do we focus on the other things? Like, how does my food look? Does it have cool, with garnishes on it? But sitting there and eating complete in the dark, you're not looking at who is ever across from you. You can only feel the warmth of your soup, or you can only feel the crunch of that chip. That would be pretty cool.
That's interesting, but you probably wouldn't want to combine it with the last thing that you said. You wouldn't want to eat in the dark near a dumpster, because that could be a different meal. A little extra seasoning on it.
That's a restaurant idea.
Yeah. Right, with the trash pandas, right?
So we'll go ahead and
It sounds like an LA restaurant. I think that someone's going to take that idea and they're going to make that. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll take a break.
So we were talking over the break about a few different things that I think would be beneficial for the listeners to hear. But before we get to that, normally we ask, what is your favorite cheat meal? I know that might not be the best phrasing for somebody that's an intuitive eater, but as far as earlier when you're talking about like what would be the food that you would not deny yourself so that you wouldn't eat a bunch of them in the bathroom later on?
Okay. So I would say that, it's something I could eat right now. I could eat it for breakfast. I want it on vacation. I want it on the weekend. Is creamy pesto and salmon. But it has to have some pasta in there to like really get all the juices and everything. But yeah, some salmon is not as good when you make it at home. I don't know what they put in it at the restaurant, if it's something fancy or just a lot of salt, but I can grill salmon at home or bake it or sear it. I've done a good job a couple times, but I will never beat Spaghetti Western in Southern Highlands or that little basement bar in Harvard, actually on vacation with just some salmon and pesto. I could talk about salmon and pesto for the next hour. Do you want to continue?
Oh yeah, I love food altogether, and pesto is probably one of my favorite sauces in general.
Oh yeah.
And have you ever done cedar plank salmon?
I've had a cedar plank salmon just once. Can't remember where it was.
If you ever make it, don't forget to put it under water, otherwise it catches on fire.
The plank, you have to. Pro tip: you have to definitely soak that thing because
yeah.
Otherwise it'll catch on fire. So yeah, people learn better by making mistakes. I'll tell you that. Yeah.
That sounds delicious, though.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So one thing that we were looking at was, so I think one thing that people have difficulty with is that there are some careers that are so overlapping, and there are some things that it's really hard for a layperson to know the difference between when do I go see this type of person for this issue. So as far as seeing someone as a nutritionist versus a dietitian, when would you how would you find the difference between those two, or when they should see one over the other?
Yeah. So there's a lot of people in our community that, help people with nutrition, whether that be like a dietary manager, at a skilled nursing facility, or your personal trainer at the gym. And they still have good information too. I think that our society is just really starting to dive into nutrition over the last 5 years especially. So I think that a personal trainer, for example, could have some really good information about, what does a healthy plate look like, or, how can we eat more fruits and vegetables? You don't really need a registered dietitian to tell you, hey, you need to eat more fruits and vegetables. However, when it starts to get more personalized to you, or definitely if you have any type of chronic disease or acute illness or anything like that, you need to see a registered dietitian because they will personalize that nutrition more. You don't want a blanket statement or blanket nutrition for everyone because our needs are all so different. And a registered dietitian can, look at your blood work, look at your history, even your family history sometimes, and evaluate what you're eating and kind of help you form that slowly to help you achieve some of your goals. Also, I think it's important to note that part of our schooling is motivational interviewing and behavior change and things like that. So that's one thing I see in the community a lot is people pursue a nutritionist, and the nutritionist may be like, yes, I can help you. You need to eat this. And it's not very personalized. And what was I what way was I going with that? Crap.
That's okay. Just as far as when would they need a dietitian then, as far as that nutrition, or as far as versus a nutritionist?
I'm trying to think. I was talking about a personal trainer, and I'm sorry. I'm really blanking on this right now. Are we going to edit this out?
We can edit it.
Yeah.
Oh, man. What was I going to say? This is going to bug me. Should I just try to keep going?
One thing, too, that I've back in high school, I shadowed an RD, and she was, I don't know if it was, or I went to a talk that she talked about, and she was basically talking about an elimination diet. So, and I think she kind of applied it to many different things, whether it was like a skin related thing or, some people have some autoimmune type of things. What's your experience with that? Like working with people who are like skin conditions or like stress and, have to deal with that. Like what's kind of that process?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to work with a registered dietitian if you're having any type of food intolerances or food allergies or anything like that. Because when we start eliminating things, we're obviously putting ourselves at risk for nutritional deficiencies. So it is important to work with a dietitian then. A dietitian could lead you through that elimination diet to kind of see what is triggering some of those issues. I just want people to be very cautious about all of the different like saliva and blood tests and different things you can mail in that'll tell you what you're sensitive to, because really they're just looking at your antibody reaction to those foods. So there are people who maybe eat a lot of bananas and eggs, and those tests are coming back and showing high levels of antibodies for bananas and eggs. And some people are kind of reading that and looking at that and thinking, I need to stop eating those things. But that's not necessarily how it works. So I think that approaching it more with food and looking at the elimination diet can be more important, because instead of looking at these markers in our blood that actually don't have to do with our intolerance, we're actually eating these foods, keeping a journal. I ate this banana, let's say, and 30 minutes later I had a rash or I felt nauseous or something like this. When you do that elimination diet, you're able to kind of start from square one and slowly introduce things to see how they affect you, because everyone, is different. We have different gut microbiome, and we have different things that break down our food, and they're at different levels in all of our bodies.
So is it going person to person? I would assume it'd be vastly different, but also there are probably independent genetics would be a big role, right? Like some people can digest some things better than others, and
absolutely.
Is that something that you find that's a big factor with a lot of the people that you work with?
It can be. And especially in Vegas, we have so many different cultures of people and everything that are here. So there's nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics. And one of them is how our ancestry has formed how we digest food. And one of them is how are the foods we're digesting changing our genes and everything like that. So if you look at, how has our ancestry helped us develop, it gets really interesting, and there's so much information there. But for example, like some Native Americans, when they started experiencing a more westernized diet, they started having really exaggerated increases in diabetes and obesity and things like that. And it's literally because their ancestors didn't have, this multitude of carbohydrates available so frequently throughout the day. They were eating, nuts and seeds and meats and things, and they were eating, they weren't eating 3 meals a day and everything like that. So, so much time later, now their ancestors are, they're experiencing some of these issues, or some people, have issues digesting dairy, and it's because that region that they lived in, they didn't consume dairy. So when you try to just throw it in there, they are literally missing that enzyme that breaks down milk. So that's kind of examples of how what we ate kind of shapes how we personally might digest food now. And I think that is important to look at, because, it is so individualized. And I think that's what I was saying before about personal trainers is, that motivational interviewing and, personalizing that. A nutritionist knows, fruits and vegetables are great, and, lean proteins and all whole grains, but if they just give that to you and tell you, hey, work this out, you might not see any good outcomes. But if you have a dietitian who you're working with, she knows that change takes time, and she can prioritize, or he can prioritize, how we slowly get to that healthy lifestyle with food.
And you mentioned some common or some nutritional deficiencies. I know it's a broad question, but are there certain commonly seen nutritional deficiencies that you see that like they are generally missing these items?
So for like well-nourished people and people who have access to food, which is my typical clientele, I don't see a lot of deficiencies. And I think a lot of that has to do with the foods that we're eating. And I can kind of talk a little bit about like the clean label. And, there's a lot of, gym goers or people who are really trying to improve their health, and they're pursuing a clean label. But I can tell you why that might not be safe. So a clean label would be when you look on the back of a food and the label doesn't have very many ingredients. And you'd think, oh, that's good, right? I mean, a banana would only say banana. That would be the one ingredient. But people are becoming more and more fearful of seeing different nutrients on that list. Like they might not know what niacin is, one of the B vitamins. So they're pursuing a label that just says rice. But I'm saying it's okay to, eat some of the foods that might have some of those extra things in there, because that was the government's way of observing people having deficiencies and trying to correct it. A really good example of that is in the 1980s, there was an act, and we started putting folic acid in some of our grains, like rice and bread and cereals. And we saw a 50% decrease in neural tube defect because women were getting more folic acid in their foods, and they no longer had that birth defect when they were pregnant. So that's a good example of how sometimes a clean label is not what we're going for, because a well-balanced diet, which it's hard to have a well-balanced diet unless you eat a lot of variety in foods, is what's going to make sure we're meeting all of our micronutrient needs. So I don't see deficiencies in many people who eat, carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables and proteins. Yeah. And actually, eatright.org, which is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they state that half of your grains should be whole. And a lot of people are confused by that. But the reason that we want half of our grains to be whole grains is because whole grains alone they're wonderful. I mean, they have all of the parts of the grain, like the bran on the outside of the grain would be the fiber and some of the B vitamins. And then the endosperm is like the starches. And then in the very center of that whole grain is the germ, and that has some of the healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Like if you bought some flaxseed, that on the outside is the bran, on the very inside is the healthy fats. So eatright.org says make half your grains whole, because we'll get that goodness from the whole foods, and then we'll also get some of that enrichment and that fortification from the foods that we see in a typical, staple diet here in the U.S.
I guess I've never fully understood all the kind of anatomy of a whole grain, because I'm glad that you went through that, because that's not something that's commonly I'm educated on. Like that's not something that we go over in general about what a grain is, because I hear those things like it's like common oatmeal types of things, like whether you want to do the steel cut. I still actually don't know the difference between a steel cut and a regular oatmeal, but I just heard that steel cut oatmeal is like generally better for you, but I don't actually know like kind of the breakdown of the actual anatomy of the grain. That's cool. Thank you for going through that.
So as far as when you're looking at different types of populations, to follow that question up, is somebody that's very active or in sports, like I'm sure they would have a very different diet than somebody who's probably not as active. So how would you go about addressing like one of those populations for, versus another?
Absolutely. So kind of earlier in this podcast, I was talking about how even the field of dietetics is so diverse. There's also, sports nutrition, which there's many registered dietitians doing so many cool things in there. But within sports dietetics, there's so much, because the needs for someone who's doing, endurance sports or like running long distances is totally different than someone, say, throwing a shot put or something like that. So they definitely have different nutrition needs. I mean, the way that our muscles work and the way that we use energy in our bodies, we have energy in our muscles, we have energy in our blood, and we get energy through our foods and different things. The activities that we do expel energy in different ways. Therefore, we need to look at nutrition differently for people who have different activities that they're doing.
Well, so as far as whether in your practice, what's something you commonly see that you wish people knew?
Okay, something that I commonly see in my practice. I'd say that I definitely, almost every client I see has definitely experienced some type of diet culture telling them how food is. So almost every client I see, is fearful of carbohydrates, because our society is, all about the keto or all about intermittent fasting or all about low carb. And, you'll see things available at the grocery store and with big bold words that say low carb. And so everyone's thinking, okay, I'm in the health food section of the grocery store. I need to eat lower carbohydrates. So it's very fun for me to explain carbohydrate breakdown to patients and to explain, how everyone's different and needs different amounts of carbohydrate. And it's probably one of the most rewarding things in my practice is being able to tell someone they can still eat carbohydrates, especially like a newly diagnosed diabetic. It's like seeing that joy in their eyes. I'm like, oh, I can be done now. Like I've experienced it. Carbohydrates, make us feel good. They increase our serotonin level, which is our happy hormone, that help us sleep. They make us happy, and they also give us energy for activities and exercise. They're not going to make us groggy. We're going to be more alert if we have carbohydrates in our diet when we're at work and when we're exercising. And I just really love telling people that we can eat them.
So I guess for a newly diabetic, what kind of differentiators do you say for like carbohydrates that, yeah, they can still eat this? Like there's obviously some that you definitely don't want to go against or, don't want to consume, but others are better. What would be your advice to somebody who is going through? I know obviously you don't have the person in front of you, but.
No, it's totally okay. So I think that first of all, we never say that you can't have something because that's sad. First of all, if you go to a wedding, you can't have any cake. Like that's too bad. It's not like that. We use the word avoid. So sometimes you might want to avoid, or you're going to eat smaller portions of those things. But I tell people, actually almost all of my clients, that we should all eat like we have diabetes, because really all it is balancing our carbohydrates. Because it's not really good for anyone to sit down and eat, a whole box of donuts, because we don't really need all of that. It might feel good at the time, but, there's a certain amount of energy that our body needs every day. And so I guess what I tell that patient is that we should all be eating this way. So don't think that, you're any different just because you have diabetes doesn't mean you need to be fearful of food. This is how we should all eat. So I explain what is a carbohydrate to them, what is your blood sugar, what is blood glucose. And, I have to show them what foods have carbohydrates in them, because some people really don't know. You'd think they would, but, they don't know. They'll ask like, oh, does coffee have carbohydrates? Does this water have carbohydrates? And, I have to work through that with them and kind of help them understand how can I balance carbohydrates throughout my day. And it's different for every patient, obviously, with, the labs I have available and their history and everything there. So sometimes I can't get that in depth with people because it's just too much, especially if they're a newly diagnosed diabetic. So I use the plate method, which is kind of like the new pyramid. Mm-hmm. The My Pyramid, so confusing. I don't think anyone understands it. I still don't. But my plate it makes a lot more sense. And I would tell someone who's newly diagnosed with diabetes that if a fourth of your plate has your carbohydrate food, you're already off to a good start. Because how often do we go get spaghetti and only a fourth of our plate is, the pasta? Not super often.
Because the carbohydrates make you happy.
Mm-hmm. So they have a place.
Yes. So what is something you've been working on, whether this is professionally, personally, physically, mentally, something, it doesn't have to be all of them, just something that you're excited about.
Okay. I very recently, especially, with all the pressures of the world, have been focusing on not relying on my cell phone so much. So not looking to that for entertainment, not looking for that to make connections with people. I think I was at work the other day and I'm like, I want to feel connected to my husband. I'm going to text him right now. It's like, you know what? No, I'm going to think about him. And I'm going to, think about him until I get home, and then I'm going to have some times with him. I was just having that thought this morning, in the 1950s, people went on dates and then they had the agony of just thinking about that person for days until they could see him again. And, I would like to have those feelings like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you all day and I haven't talked to you and I'm so excited to see you. So that's kind of something I've been focusing on, trying to make relationships, trying to connect with nature, trying to pick up a book and have a moment with a book on the couch instead of the TV on the couch. Because I think we're getting so far away from that, and I want to get closer to that.
So what are you reading right now?
I just bought Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. It's my favorite movie, the 1994 version, and there's also a 2019 version that I also loved. So, if I love this movie so much and it means so much to me, shout out to all my sisters. I have so many of them. But I bought the book so I could experience that and feel that joy of like reading that book, because especially around Christmas time, that movie brings me so much joy. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it and being like right in the middle of it around Christmas time.
I love it. So what would you like to leave listeners with?
All right, I need a moment. I would like listeners to know that food is, a part of everyone's life, obviously, but you don't have to be fearful of it. If you embrace your joy for food and nurture yourself, have that respect for your body, you will find that enjoyment in food and have a healthy life, because you love your body and you're giving yourself that enjoyment of food, and you will be nourished mentally and physically.
So how can people find you?
Well, definitely check out desertdietitians.com. You'll find all of my information, but you can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook, and, give us a call, shoot us an email. We would love to talk.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much, Maddy, for joining us today, and we really appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guests as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast, or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.
So what was it like growing up, close to a dairy farm and kind of on a farm on yourself? Like, what was that like growing up?
Yeah. So I grew up on what we would consider a hobby farm. So, all those fruits and vegetables and everything. But going out to Grandma's house a couple hours up north, she had, the beef cows and the dairy cows. And it's really interesting to see not that factory farm kind of idea that everyone pictures, but my 80-year-old grandma walking into the barn and yelling for Bessie, and, Bessie knows her own stall, and, we clean them and we hook them up to the milker and everything. And, they have personalities and names. And, my grandma has been milking cows, all her life, until really recently, actually, when a cow fell on her and you broke her leg. So that was kind of the end of that. But, it was really cool, going to my grandma's farm, and she's so active. She always had different things cooking, and, feeding the farmers on the farm is half her job, is growing things to feed everyone. So actually looking back, it's pretty cool that they could probably never leave the farm and they'd have enough food, almost. Aside from flour and bread and rice and stuff, they could eat all the different vegetables and fruits that they had in the farm. They had beef cattle, they hunted deer, they had chickens. So it was pretty cool, being a part of that. It felt like you were kind of in a different time when you're on that farm.
Did your grandma make just a big meal for everybody and everyone would sit around? Or?
Oh, yeah. Actually, a couple times a day. It really is what you picture. You're a farmer, you wake up at 4:30 in the morning and you're out in the fields, and you come home at lunchtime, you eat a crazy amount of food because you need so much, because you're expelling so much energy. You go back out to the farm until dinner time, and then you eat your big dinner. So, it's cool to be, at that dinner table with all of those hardworking farmers, and, with that food that your grandma made, and, the jam that she brought up from the basement that she made with the raspberries last season. It's so wholesome, and it feels so good to, eat that farm food, that unpasteurized milk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it.
Very cool. And once again, we really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.